It's a staff meeting Thursday, January 26th. We're talking about how we take Brandon's idea of taking the message directly to the FBI, the police, the military, etc. So, and Luke is giving a behavioral explanation. So, Luke, could you just try to reiterate what you just said?
Sure. We're talking about policing in general, right? So policing within or from within a set of norms starts off in the category of cooperation, right? The police action is a cooperation with the commons that they're policing, right? And then it shifts out of cooperation when it must, when some sort of deviation from the norms occurs or some sort of hostility manifests or whatever. But it starts off as
they go to from let's give them even more charitable. There's a service involved. It can't service when service as needed, cooperation if needed, and what did you call it? The third one?
Conflict.
Conflict is needed, yes.
Right. Yeah. That's where the whole concept of protect and serve comes from. Right. And it's a very charitable label to apply to policing in these days, but that's because we've lost norms and community in a lot of ways. Right? So policing outside of norms starts from the point of conflict and only shifts out of conflict when it must.
Okay, so when you're in a normative, you're in an ethnically homogenous, which includes culturally homogenous, which calls value homogenous society.
Behaviorally homogenous.
Right, behaviorally homogenous society. What happens is that they are able to facilitate from a premise of presumption of cooperation.
Correct.
And what you're saying is the minute we exit, what did you say? Behaviorally homogenous. Once we exit behaviorally homogenous, which I would say ethnically, culturally, value, and objective differences, right? When you're trying to get different ends. Then when you share means and ends, police help you cooperate. When you have divergent means and ends, they start with the problem of of everything being conflict, having to attempt to bring about cooperation, which feels like trying to throw a football with your wrist chained to your ankle.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's at least from my perspective, that's the reason why policing at the federal level across behavioral groups, across commons, across distinct commons, is always going to start as antagonistic. It has to, because it's not engaging with any set of norms in place.
Hence why sheriffs are almost always loved and
yes,
are almost always hated. Okay,
right, and that's why sheriffs are superior in policing for commons to the external police, the federal level police.
They also have personal investment.
Right. But that's what, and the further you get away from that homogenous behavioral set, those set of norms, the less protect and serve applies, and the more enforced law applies.
Okay, so let's just, is it okay if we do the analysis of this, because it's helpful for the audience, and it certainly gives us make sure we've communicated that, as Brandon was just teasing me, is because I'm the one in the group that's most, not our group, but I mean, I'm one of the people on our side that's most
charitable
to the other side.
Institutions in general.
Well, it's because
their value. We know their value. That's what
right, but it's because I just study incentives, right? So I tend to personalize things less. So anyway, so Luke, so now if we have the origin, let's go beyond the FBI to the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, which came about for a set of reasons, just like the FBI came about for a set of reasons. But once those reasons are established, these institutions begin to increase the scope of their work. All right, I mean, I always think it's interesting that the what we think of as the Secret Service, is in charge of counterfeiting. Why? Why does a Treasury agent and have anything to do with defense of the president or other in other words, political, personal protection services. I just think that's funny. How did that fucking happen? It's the same thing for the ATF. It's like, do you care about I don't want the ATF regulating gun shops. They have the worst incentive in the world. But I'm not sure I disagree with the ATF regulating explosives, which is the reason they came into being. Right? I mean, the why is because explosives are a political weapon, right? And they're also the problem is they're actually maintainable by process and procedure, right? I mean, it's like maintaining roadways or transport systems, right? I mean, this is a thing that has to move vast distances. They're not produced many places, right? So I guess I'm okay with that because there's so much interstate travel involved or interstate transport of explosives. Okay, I can sort of see that. I still think this is one of those cases where you develop the expertise centrally and then devolve it to the states, right? And that's how I feel about the FBI. Is you have this thing that we had a series of problems that gave birth to the FBI, notably organized crime, which their mission succeeded, and then it should be devolved to the states. And it's just like everything else I say. Well, you say, well, that's, yeah. I say, well, I mean, I take the same position on research and development. Whereas there's like scientific research can only be funded centrally by the federal government. But once this thing gets going, you just give it out to industry or the states. And it's the same thing with almost any system. There's very few systems that benefit permanently from centralization.
We're trying to do it with power. We're trying to do it with power.
What?
We're trying to do it, but with power distance, reducing the power distance.
Well, you need to concentrate capital.
Right. You need
It's
to
like it's the
concentrate
same
power
thing
and then distribute it, concentrate capital and then distribute. We're not doing the
Right.
distribute part good. We're
Well,
doing it poorly. We're doing
Not doing the
distribute
concentration part
poorly.
good.
but that's because these organizations have, there's two reasons. Well, let me finish, and then Luke, can you keep in mind what you just said?
Yeah.
All right. First is that there's the illusion of efficiency by centralization, right? Because it does seem like it's more efficient to have one group do the same thing everywhere versus distribute the same thing everywhere, except where it's dependent upon the knowledge of human beings. Right? Because it's it's like the reason you want your sheriff is like in where I used to live is because he knew every fucking criminal personally. It's not a statistical problem. When he says, I just opened my crook, he called it his crook book. He says, we all have a crook book. And he says, I just know who did something, pretty much. It's one of these 20 people. I'm just going to find the evidence to figure out which one of the 20 people it was. Right? Now, if you get an urban setting there, that's less likely. Why? Well, because they get to the point where it starts being anonymous instead of a relationship, where the problem is knowledge of there's things the point is things don't scale. Right? But the problem is developing expertise doesn't decentralize. In other words, there's the problem of developing marginal difference in expertise is almost always a capital formation problem. Right? And so you need capital centralization. It's the same thing for industries. That's why I always bitch. Why did we develop NASA but not then do what Musk is doing? Why is California succeeding? Because it operates like a monarchy, which is that the business interests are basically bankers racing with each other to generate longer term investments. Why isn't our government doing that? Which is what the monarchies did. Right. So the monarchies were sitting there. I need more. I want more money for my people, more taxes. So I need to generate more revenue. But the federal governments that we have in the post-war period, they're extracting more net revenue on the presumption of infinite growth. Whereas if you look at how monarchies worked or how the capital sector in California works, is that they said the only way to make money is to make more money. Right? Which is so fucking logical when you think about it. It actually it actually hurts to realize that our governments are that backward in this era that they can just say, well, if there's growth over here, let's tax it. If there's right, I mean, they're doing the absolute worst way possible rather than saying there's an opportunity to concentrate capital that will produce growth over here. And then you get like countries like England, which try to get on the battery thing. Now, right, I'm going to tease my own kind here. So like the French, right? If they're centralized, so they will centralize capital to produce an industry, right? And then they'll run it, but they'll do it with unions and whatever. The British want to be on the battery game, but the British can't manufacture a car that can make it across a parking lot without having an electronic nervous breakdown. So I mean, that's just part of they basically have a hacker culture. I don't know how to describe it, right? If it's one of the reasons they're really good soldiers is they don't depend, is if we can get 5 friends together to do it, we'll get it done. Right. And that's their sort of mentality. If I get my mates together, we can make it happen. But they have issues beyond that. I'm teasing them a little bit, but the cultural analysis is actually true. Whereas in America, we're like, people are just going to follow money. I don't need them to be my mates. I just need them to want money. Right. And we'll get it done. And so my point is that governments just are inversely organized. And I just view the FBI, ATF, whatever, most of these problems as a failure to decentralize after the expertise and capitalism. In other words, you have to organize enough capital to organize enough people to create a motive for persistence, but then move that motive for persistence out into the marketplace so it has to survive rather than sucking on the teat of extraction. All right. So I went down way too long of an arc there, and I fucked over Luke by doing that. So Luke, you were going to say something that I interrupted you on.
So we were talking about the centralization of these things, right? And
yeah.
I think in a lot of ways what we've lost is the federal government. It had a commons, but the members of that commons were the states, not the citizens.
Yes.
And so there was a set of norms that existed because states, as legal entities, as representative bodies of the people within the states, have incentives. And anytime you have incentives, norms emerge, right? So from the federal level, under federation, the federal level could operate from within a set of norms, but only at that scale.
That's a great way of framing it. Yes.
But as soon as we lose that distinction, and we stop having a federation, and we start having direct citizenship, where the federal level is touching the individual citizen directly, which it never was supposed to and never should, right? Then we lose that, and then it goes back to being entirely antagonistic, entirely conflict based.
So the resolution of the government, a federal government, can never be greater than the commonality and concurrency of the states.
Right.
Whereas the minute a federal government seeks commonality and concurrency among the citizens, it gets to the point where it's oppressing someone, right, at all times, right? And so even within a state, actually, states are reasonably good at this, of saying, states without a New York or a Los Angeles anyway, states are pretty good at, well, I mean, this region wants this and this region wants that, and we're here to serve them, right? Because they don't have enough of a lever. Whereas, I mean, the interstate, the cost of interstate road maintenance alone is enough for the federal government to bribe the states, and of course, which they use all the fucking time. It's one of their favorite means of coercion. What would happen? Can I ask this question though? Just because I want to have it discussed. What would happen if the states paid the taxes to the government instead of the government directly collecting the taxes?
Yeah, that's how it ought to work.
The
state should be seeking insurance from the government, and they should be paying for that exchange. But the citizens should never be paying directly to the federal government.
And so because that way there's no question of who's the customer.
Right.
So the problem you get, and so you answered the question. See, I expected that to take 5 minutes and it took 15 seconds. All right. So, so the next problem you run into is okay, but the reason, one thing, we have this beautiful thing, island America, right? That Europe could have if they built a wall across the Bosphorus and the Urals, right? Right. They could have that beautiful little wall there. And so you could have fortress, like we have Fortress America, they could have Fortress Europa. And just like China is trying to build Fortress China, right? You can have these fortresses. So the problem with the federated system is the willingness of a state to defect. Now, I don't know if any state is borderline, but given the Mexification of like New Mexico is a great example. We'll give it, I can see that's a possibility. All right. Or California.
Right.
Which is basically where all the lunatics went to live after post-war.
Right. But the states are defecting now, and now they're just able to externalize the costs of that defection. Under a tighter federalized system, they wouldn't be able to externalize the costs of that defection.
Right. Right.
So the current model doesn't solve that problem either. It just makes it a problem for all of us.
Well, I mean, I would say that you can defect all you want as long as it does. As long, in other words, you can have interests all you want, as long as none of those interests are conspiracies. Like, you're going to give me the state of whatever, but you can't give the state of these states equal rights, right? That's a conspiracy against the common interest.
Yeah, if you're gonna federate with us, you don't get to federate with our enemies.
Or you can't conspire against members, right? Other members, right? And so the reason is, of course, is that the strategic value of the territorial coherence is greater than anything else. So the way I would like to say that is the federal government has responsibility, just like the monarchies did, for territorial integrity and territorial defense. But we get to do whatever the fuck we want on how we're going to organize to occupy that land, right? As long as it's not against the interest of any other, right? Which is just seems pretty obvious shareholder agreement, right? I mean, right. So I don't see why that's a problem, except that when you get right now, California is, first of all, it should be 6 states instead of 1, right? That's one of the problems. And the Senate, as it's currently organized, has created a problem, right? The reason nobody wants to break California into 6 states is because it gives California more Senate votes, right? When that's a solvable problem, right? It's a solvable problem by various means, right? And would be you could increase those votes, the number of seats over time, or you can increase other states' seats, right? And there's all sorts of games you could play. But what would happen in California is it would rapidly degenerate, so to speak, out of California into 6 states, each of which had very different interests, because they have very different interests. And Los Angeles is to the greater California, like New York is to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, right? I mean, it's a fucking Eastern Pennsylvania. I mean, it's a fucking tyrant. Whereas Chicago is to Illinois and everybody else around it. Chicago needs a wall around it and be a city state. All right. So these are solvable problems, right? These are not unsolvable questions. Okay.
Well, maybe somebody's already done the math, but there's got to be math somewhere that's, kind of like the political equivalent to a Dunbar number, where beyond this point, we shift from a model that is capable of cooperation to a model that is inherently rooted in conflict.
Right. So, I mean, we see this in Europe right now, is that some countries are happy to go woke, and some countries are not, right? But that's a local decision. There's no reason the federal government should have any say over that. You know how when it comes to defense, though, it's really obvious right now that Europe needs central defense because we're providing it still. So I mean, there's only three things that happens with federation, right? You get the benefit of military, right? And that's extremely. That also means you get the benefit of military political negotiation. In other words, it reinforces cohesion because of that military. You get trade negotiation for the entire bloc, which is for the benefit of all parties, right? And you get insurance across all parties, which honestly, it's like, well, nobody wants to insure Greeks because they're fucking lazy, and yeah, they are. So sorry, I'm sorry. I don't blame them for being lazy because if you've ever been there, it's like, I'm going to go enjoy the day, right? I mean, it's Greece, for Christ's sake. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to look at the surroundings on the ocean and the history and the sunlight. I mean, it's like Greek islands is like shooting natural heroin, mainlining natural human heroin, right? And there's no real harm to it other than the Mediterranean effect of, why am I doing anything other than like sitting under a tree, eating a salad with some fresh olives? I mean, and enjoying it with my friends. I mean, it's not like when you're like, you live in, northern Norway and it's like fucking dark 8 months of the year, and you've got what you call a summer, which is basically a short spring, and you're otherwise bound in little cold spaces the rest of the time. I'm trying to be a smartass, but you get the idea, right? I mean, it's just a different sort of attitude about the world you'd live in. But I mean, nobody wants to insure Greece because they're lazy. Yeah, they're lazy, and it's corrupt as fuck. I mean, we pick on the Italians because they're like proud of their corruption. Like it's like one step above the soccer, right? As football, right? Is their corruption in politics is like a social game that they all get enough entertainment out of it. They don't feel like they need to correct it too much. And I mean, it's just funny, but the Greeks, I mean, they're just like one step from the communists. They vote in a government that gives away all these bennies, only to now until they got to the point where they're like the only place to work is for the government, right? At all, because there's no money, there's nobody working anywhere else, right? I mean, it's just fucking nightmare. And of course, the rest of Europe doesn't want to rescue them because they wouldn't reform. But I mean, that's different from, holy shit, you had an earthquake, right? Or you had a flood. I mean, Europeans are great at Deus Ex Machina, right? The hand of God came in at the last moment and fucked things up. We'll all insure each other over that, but nobody wants to insure your lazy ass from drinking ouzo in the fucking sunshine, right? I mean, and I've been there, and I get it. Oh my, I could just think of how nice life is there, and the fish, eating the fish.
And I don't think Europe has earthquakes.
Greece sure as fuck does. My grandfather, we got a call from my grandfather, little kid, when I was a little kid, because they had an earthquake and the fucking outer wall of the hotel fell off. And he was standing there in his fucking underwear. Fucking outside the hotel. So yeah, well, you don't get many tornadoes in Europe though, right? There's some, but not many.
Well, recently, like a year ago, there was one in Czechia, which I thought that's never going to happen.
Yes.
It did.
Well, of course, there's a lot of floods though. Germany just had a couple of great ones, right? So we don't mind insuring each other against things that are not our responsibility, our causality, right? Wars of aggression, natural catastrophes, even crises of health. Our different gene pools live different. We don't mind insuring that stuff, but nobody wants to insure people that it basically provokes altruistic punishment, right? You want to punish them instead for their laziness. So that's the net result is that that federal governments are very good at those things that are good at scale, which is defense, right? Defense, trade policy, insurance, and the fourth one, which we need to get good at, which is adversarial competitive investment. In other words, why did fucking Musk have to build batteries? We've known the battery problem was known when I was in high school. Why wasn't that, why wasn't that a research program? Why did that take a private guy? And he did it like fucking overnight. Trying to throw that out there, see if there's any commentary.
Well, I would always just say it's because we don't have the law, so we don't incentivize people to do anything good. So people have to choose to do it, and against incentives that say don't, it's hard.
So we've decided 4 or 5, depending on how we divide defense, 4 or 5 basic issues a federal government have. And I think Luke's explanation is the clearest one that we can probably get into, which is you serve your customers. Your customers have a divergent interests as we go more granular, and more homogenous industries as we become larger. So the purpose of the government any federal government should be the Council of States, and the states should be the council, should be worried about their people. And what we want is we want political competition, right? We want political competition over policies. And the reason is that we want the most R&D, right, in policies, and then they can spread. But this idea that the left is always trying to perpetuate is that we know better, we'll do it this way, is actually to prevent market solutions. That's what their goal is, right? Is to prevent market solutions.
That way they don't have to compete.
All right.
We didn't name conflict resolution, but that's another one, or dispute resolution, right? But that's the other one that
Courts.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Let's do them all.
But under a model like that's functioning, then we would see, with population densities, we would see the city states start emerging. They would become separate entities, and so they wouldn't be able to externalize the cost of their silliness onto the extended populations of the states that they're currently located in.
But as far as I understand, we want to impose rule of law everywhere. So how attractive would those cities remain if everyone was forced to tell the truth about diversity, for example?
They wouldn't be attractive to me, but it would allow for greater experimentation within the law.
I'm saying that some of the experiments that are now happening and are to be imposed on the whole federation, they couldn't even start.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Say that again, Bryan, Martin.
That some of those experiments that are now being imposed on the whole nation, they couldn't even start if you couldn't cross the limits of truth and reciprocity.
We're going to limit
even in those cities. You would have to give those.
Sorry, Martin, please continue.
You would have to specifically give those cities exceptions from the law to allow them to continue what they're doing.
Correct, but there's a lot of historical precedent for that, and it's not necessarily a problem. They just can't export the cost of their doing so, right?
Yeah, the case I'm making is you always are most charitable with institutions. Well, I think they're good for their hierarchy and the baked in power. Like, people perceive that the institutions are powerful. Doing it correct from the institutions we've got is the easiest way to do things. And we can do it on 10% of the people that are currently there, and they can
Right.
reap most of the rewards. And everyone else would be tripling down on everything they care about. I'm saying we have all the capital to offer one another, right, with a perspective shift, because we measure across all capitals. And once people realize that they've been spending down their commons and their normative property and so on, and that's introduced friction and the inability to predict into the future, into their lives, and they hate that, and it's killing them early, they're going to want to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, we get to call them insane. It's like, oh, you're just insane then.
They already do.
Well, it's the problem. Again, can I take the immature and female mind approach, which is that it's not really, it's sort of like a Dunning-Kruger problem, which I know Martin and I tease each other about. It's just that the belief, there's so many biases that make the individual convinced he's average or right by default, that the ignorance of that individual ends up being played out as all those demands for a solution being obvious and easy that everyone will agree with, when it's the absolute opposite of when the truth is the absolute opposite.
It's obvious and simple, and anyone who resists is a criminal demonstrably.
Right. I mean, it's like, okay, well, it is if it's a negativa,
Yes.
but it's not if it's a positiva. And so anytime somebody says people should believe or think or feel, they're fucking high. And it's just madness. Trying to think of where to go with that. We added another thing here. I was trying to go for the charters of the federal government. He gave me a resolution of disputes. Oh, it's the interior.
You should want to give your federal government money because they're good at centralizing capital.
Right.
As a citizen, like, I have a little bit of extra money, I should give it to the people who are best with it. And that should be your government. And if it's not, you don't have a good one.
Well, I mean, we give money to rich people. Well, it's okay that wealthy people would, here's how to look at it. There are things that are what we call basic research that end up producing technological advantages. And I don't mean like just computer and hardware. I mean like biological and health and all this other stuff, right? There's basic research. Now, only governments can really fund basic research because the returns are too indirect. All right. There is competitive research and development, which is an applied science, right? Applied research or basic R&D, which produces economic advantage for the benefit of the people. And then within that, there's sort of what I would call consumption research and development. which the freaking industry, private sector is very, very good at. But what you see happening is that because it's possible for the private sector to accumulate such vast numbers of funds largely through their own credit expansion instead of the credit expansion being in the state, those private institutions then have enough capital to invest in political R&D. Isn't that a nice way of calling corruption? Rather than basic industrial or consumptive R&D. Did I say that clearly enough? Yes.
I don't know. Do it again.
So basic R&D, right? Science.
Yep.
The returns on that are not obvious.
Nope.
Strategic R&D.
Yep.
Right. That's going to be military, industrial, economic, competitive. The one I would use today is, why did Musk have to do the battery thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's consumer R&D,
yep.
which is, I want a better dishwasher than the girlfriend or wife or mechanical device. Right. Mm-hmm. There's consumer. Now, so the problem is that we've allowed, instead of credit expansion happening within the government, where the government uses credit expansion for strategic and for basic and strategic investment, we've pushed most basic and strategic investment, as well as consumer investment, out into the private sector. But the private sector can use credit expansion. So because they could use credit expansion, they're moving up channel into they're not doing strategic, they've taken consumer expansion, consumer research and development, and industrial research and development to a place where it's purely in the interest of the private sector, right? In other words, themselves instead of the population. And in doing so, they are depriving the state of doing that credit expansion and research and development in the strategic and basic investment, right? Does that make sense? And so what's happened is, now that they have accumulated that money, they've been using it for their own the private sector, political research and development. Now, we call this buying people off, corruption, special interest, but it's research and development. I mean, if we want to create a universal system of measurement for it, it's research and development and obtaining profits from developing means of organizing political systems against the interests of the population. So, I mean, it's really obvious. Like, my always thing is starve the beast. Change the incentives and starve the beast. Well, it turns out we've already laid out how to do this. Pretty easy to turn off the spigot so that they're always working in the consumer interest instead of theirs. The difference is, it's a lot. There's no more privatization of commons production and socialization of their losses when they make a mistake, which is what we live under today. Instead, we would push their capital into longer term investing, which would be better for the interests of the people. And they would no longer be able to privatize the gains of the commons we call government insurance. And instead, that would go to the people. It's not like I'm a communist or anything. I just want to stop rent seeking because it's immoral, right? I mean, it's not complicated. So did I explain it better that time?
You're a commonsist.
I'm a commonsist. Yes, I'm a commonsist. Which is that the end product is the result of our organization should result. We wish our organization to result in the production of capitalizing commons, right? Things that have enduring recursive benefit rather than consumption.
Mhm.
Oh, and furthermore, that we're not assuming anybody's very smart or capable or uncorruptible. So communism takes the other position, is that it's essentially a system of corruption and black markets because it works against human interests and incentives. It assumes knowledge that doesn't and competency which doesn't exist, and it assumes a network of incentives that don't exist.
Imagine having universal hyper-consumptive markets and agents who always think they're correct.
No, I don't want to. It gives me nightmares.
Well, that's what we have right now.
That hurt. You can tease me about want to public discuss things in a positive light, right? But that way I get an optimistic view of man and mankind. But then you have to come in and then piss on the goddamn fire hydrant with this urine of truth.
I'm trying to
negativity.
I'm trying to set a cognitive precedent. You know what that meant, and it hurt you. But that's a system, a very closed one, but it is one that ends in catastrophe. I'm not sure what percentage of the population even understands systems.
Well, I mean, we've together spent years. One of the things we do that is really not obvious, which we just illustrated, is that we're looking for a means of commensurability between systems. By looking for commensurability between systems, we discover what the system really is, right? Like causality, in other words, a causality of a system rather than description of a system. This is very different, right? So we're a descriptive cause versus an experiential cause. It's another example of the male versus female causal. So we spend our lives doing this, which is we call it first principles reasoning, but it's causal reasoning, right? What brings this about? And we do this because it creates universal commensurability. Again, in other words, everything can be explained by the same system, meaning acquisition and capital and total incentives and stuff. So we create this universal system of measurement, which prevents us from making stupid ideas. So the thing is we're really good at it, right? I mean, we've been doing it. We've mastered it. We've basically turned it into a science. And then we say, well, why doesn't the rest of humanity understand this? They can't even conceive of the argument that I just made as they can't even conceive that such a thing could be done. Right?
It just puts a hard filter on the stupid ideas. I can't say that it gets rid of them altogether. Because I'm pretty sure they come in there all the time.
Well, physical science did a really good job of decreasing the cone of divergence. We're saying we can completely decrease the cone of divergence. That doesn't mean that it's a point. It just means it's a cone. It's a smaller cone. Will humanity ever stop the attempt at getting a discounts or magical thinking, whatever it is, by lying, denying, fictionalizing, undermining sedition and treason? Is that ever going to happen? Fuck no.
Well, not if you keep reducing them to geometry.
Oh, so hard. And then you say, well, okay, well, that's great. So sorry, if I can, now that you set me on this fucking path, I gotta take it to its logical consequence. So we know that logic is not natural to me. In other words, there is some logic to mankind, right? Which is but in other words, human beings do wayfind. But that doesn't mean it's consistent in correspondence with anything other than finding a way, right? I mean, that does that make sense? Rationalizing, excusing, justifying, getting what I want. I mean, there is a logic to getting what you want, right? I mean, is it logical? Like, does it scale? Does it, is it something that you can claim as a good or a truth? Okay. Well, so the problem we get into is that we've learned, especially over the past 10 or 15 years, how frighteningly rare and how rapidly degrades human logical capacity, even to do a single negative inference. Right. So I haven't gone and codified all that, right, as to at this 7 points of IQ, this is what's happening at this. And because why? Because there's an overlap between conscientiousness, openness, the amount of knowledge, whatever. But basically, logic degrades really quickly. And so we say, well, we can bring people to understand the logic of the universe that we call physics to some degree. But what happens then is that people are merely aware they can't do it. This is important perception. They're merely aware they can't do it because they don't understand physics.
I've never heard anyone's sorry, Curt, please finish.
So the problem with once we get into behavioral science is that people aren't going to be okay with saying I can't do that. Because now it's not, because interference in your wayfinding on physics is interference in your excuse making. But interference in your wayfinding in behavioral economics it does impact your wayfinding, right? It means your ability to make, it's not your ability to make excuses alone, right? It might be a very severe limitation on your ability to make excuses, and you might encounter this feeling of just being wrong all the fucking time. So, which is a problem, right? Because people need the will to continue, to persist. Well, a stupid person needs a will to persist also. So if you take a stupid person with a will to persist, that means we have to turn what we do into a norm before a stupid person can function in it. Because they can't function it by reason. They have to function it by imitation. That's what's hard. And the problem is, the more advanced we get, the worse that gets. All right, go ahead.
Well, we only have to, I only want to get people to the point where they perceive, right? They understand that, well, I couldn't have thought of it like that. I mean, some people have to talk the words they think out in order to think them through.
Yes.
Some people think in words, and there's words and pictures, words, pictures, and systems, words, pictures, systems, and simulations. Then there's adversarial competition between those simulations, right? Then there's making sure those simulations are not false. And then there's accounting for the deceptions and actions of people that actually exist.
Yes.
I've never hurt anyone's feelings by telling them, like, where does your cognition stop on that scale?
That was genius. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Well, yeah. Where are you even aware?
Right. Did you know that was a thing? Did you know that was a thing? Right. And
Yeah.
Where are you?
Well, I mean, I don't want to I don't want to beat on women, but let's beat on the immature mind. And just that my kid at age 3 was pretty painfully logical, right? So, I mean, I can't really, but I mean, you just gave out a thing, but it's very impossible to tell a woman, you can't think like we can. You can't imagine thinking like we can. However, we can imagine thinking like you do. It makes us want to have a nervous breakdown, but we can imagine thinking like you do. We can't do it for very long. We can't sustain it, but we can imagine it's possible. Right? You can't even imagine what we do is possible. And that is a very hard thing for the claim of equality to deal with.
That doesn't exist here. The equality thing.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing as what equality means, equality under the law. That's all.
That's the best we're going to give you.
Right. Well, that's the best you can
We
have.
can give you. It's the best we can give you.
It's the best. It can't be better than that. What?
That's technically not equality. That's equal application. Something. No one is equal.
Yes.
But
Well done.
I think your the fidelity of your wayfinding is limited by your perceptual fitness.
Yes.
Right? So we can improve everybody's fidelity, right? There's training and development we can do to maximize your genetic expression of your ability to input signals correctly, or receive external signals correctly, which is that perceptual fitness, right? And we're not doing any of that. So even within, we're not, there's no such thing as equality, but each of us can do some optimization and do some maximization of our genetic expression. So There's a lot of room that we're not taking advantage of.
But
to
that will
improve our
make people
incentives.
even more unequal, though.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean,
but it will make them all better.
yeah, I'm trying. This is the
Yeah, but
question.
those that will stay at the bottom will not like that.
Mhm.
Okay, so people want the problem with the hierarchical representation is respect and disrespect. The problem is producing respect. Once people have respect, they don't necessarily care about their position in the hierarchy. So the problem is making people be respectable regardless of their position in the hierarchy. And then, right, because position we don't have control over the fact that you've got a 85, 95, 105, 115, 125, 30. We don't have any control over that. We do have control over the fact that, yeah, it's more difficult to train everybody, but it's not actually that difficult to train everybody up to what we consider an 85 or 95 level of a duty. It's basically a mature child, right? You don't have to have particular abilities. You just have to not stretch outside your abilities. And as long as you're doing your duty, we have to respect people. Now, I hate complimenting the fucking communists, but one of the things I notice in the post-communist countries is they beat that in with a fucking stick through education. So I know it can be done. And so the question is giving people respect. The problem is the feminine method of warfare is disrespect. and so they've institutionalized disrespect as universal. So every person who thinks he or she is special is institutionalizing disrespect. And then in order to bring it back into gear, every moral person is using disrespect to bring the other people back into position. And it's resulting in basically what Liz Lou said, warfare.
Well, they attack the measure, which is the grammars.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they do. They say things mean different things in different contexts.
One of the side effects of the work we're doing in creating commensurable systems of measurement is we're actually lowering the bar for accessing things like falsification and decidability. You don't need mastery over a subject in order to know that subject's specific measurement.
Okay, you just that was way too profound to say in 2 sentences and not talk about. So you got to say that again and let's see if we can add some color to it.
Sure. So because we're creating measurements that apply to all domains, all people have to do to access an ability to make decisions about any of those domains or falsify the information they're getting about those domains is learn that system of measurement that applies across all domains. Okay. So you don't have to learn the specific units or systems of measurement for all of these various domains in order to be competent in, let's say, a political environment, right? You don't need mastery over law and behavior and psychology and cooperate. You don't need all of those separate masteries. You just need to learn and gain competence in that commensurate system of measurement, and you can apply it across all of those domains. It significantly lowers the bar.
That's the argument that we need to show the people need to vaguely understand the posters version,
right?
Or at least have it in the pocket, right? Look it up and say, and then the simple version they understand today is follow the money, right? Which we would flip around as follow the incentives,
right?
And that's it, right? I mean, if you follow the incentives and you know that thing, you're saying that's about all that's needed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the minute you're looking at an interaction and you can demonstrate an externality, you're at a decision point. You know that demonstration of externality has breached reciprocity in that interaction. So you don't have to know how exactly it does or what the exact costs of it are. You just know you can decide that that's a violation and you're done.
So this is another argument that, the work we've done is vast because it's falsificationary.
Right.
Because we have to falsify. The reason we can't, he says, there's a conflict between what we do. What we do is reducible to a couple of posters.
Yeah.
It's not that. The problem is we had to falsify all the alternatives
Yes.
in order to define the what was left, right, which is the parsimony.
Yeah.
And so the work we had to do to describe this entire system across all disciplines, excuse me, isn't what everybody needs to do.
No.
They need to know that the work has been done and that it's reduced, that therefore the positive expression is the, I mean, acquisition, capital in total or property in total, right? Reciprocity, truth, and then the first basic outline of the first principles, which is like there's 15 of them,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like, okay, that's the universe, and our basic problem is that when we tell people universal commensurability, universal value neutral commensurability by and operational logic of constructible falsification or logic, right? They have no idea what that means, right? But what it means is it's fucking math,
Right?
It can't be wrong.
We afford people to spot ignorance, error, bias, and deceit, right? There's a methodology for it because we're affording people to understand how those things are framed when they're testified to. Meaning they come out as lies when you're speaking on behalf of ignorance, error, bias, or deceit. They're framed as lies. The tone is lies. Like you get wise to it pretty fast. And that affords you to see everything that isn't false. That's all the options.
Yeah.
It's not less options. That's the only ones that exist.
So let's play this out. So run a simulation very quickly, just for fun, because I'm going to use an absurd example too. Because I just want to. I want to laugh because you guys talking serious shit now. I got to find a laugh. So you go out and you teach a bunch of kindergartners and first graders and second graders there, which you can teach this stuff, right? I mean, it's not that difficult because it's human behavior by example. Then you get up in a higher grade teaching how lying is done and whatever. Okay, so now what happens when I'm not happy? When I'm not happy with the way the world is, and I want something, and my impulse is that I want that. Now I can't lie. I can't deny. What am I left with? Where does that emotion go? What is my vehicle for catharsis other than a punch in the face? And isn't a punch in the face the only honest way to express? In other words, I'm trying to tie this back to Luke. Is this a punch in the face the most honest expression of being pissed off?
It is when restrained by norms.
Yes. Oh shit.
I don't know. I think when we really nail the education piece of this, people are going to be able to utilize this stuff in the same way they can play catch without mastering physics, mastering their awareness of physics, right? I mean, they're going to be able to make decisions just like that.
Because we're not. It's human. So you're going against human nature. That's not true. Human nature is amoral. It takes advantage of opportunities. The history of civilization is the suppression of irreciprocal opportunities, right? And the restoration of irreciprocal word and deed. Restitution, and sometimes punishment and correction as a means of prevention. So all we're doing is increasing the degree of prevention. So the reason I'm trying to ask this is, what's the steam valve for my frustration? And the answer, I think, is important because it tells us that we can't just tell people you can't lie, cheat, and steal anymore. They have to. It's like, where did sports came about because men couldn't hunt anymore, and war so easily, right? And so, what's the equivalent way of people getting? You have to. The real answer is you have to increase socialization. We have to increase vehicles for increased socialization or something. There's going to be some way out for the emotions to come out. Okay, because the other reaction is people literally can't stop lying and denying.
Oh, I
And
do
that
it very well.
we've
I
just
just
hold
do
on.
it-
I want to finish, and all we've done is raise the sensitivity on sociopathy and psychopathy. And now we've just said, okay, now, if you can't learn it, then you're a psychopath or sociopath, and you're broken. So we end up doing to normies what the autism ADD spectrum has done. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Is that I'm like, okay, well, you can make most people happy, but now where does the defective people have a means of expression, of catharsis today? And we're increasing the number of defective people rather rapidly, both genetically and by, as Luke says, failure of discipline. Well, we usually call it education, but recently I've been saying, well, we just call it what it is, which is discipline. We're disciplining and training. I'm not sure when it becomes education. It's probably when it becomes a skill you can put to place in the workplace. The rest of it's discipline and training. So what's happening? Where does that go? What happens to the fuckheads when we actually know when they're being fuckheads and it's not an opinion?
I think there's a.
I'm trying. I thought I was going to get something out of this, and I talked about it a while to see if anything would cook, but I'm not seeing anything. Go ahead.
There's always skull piles.
Okay, you went to the bottom, Brandon. I interrupted you. Martin?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you can do your best to train them not to be fugheads, but you won't succeed with everyone.
We're going to be able to parse error from deceit, right? Parse ignorance from error, bias, and deceit is criminal. The rest of them you help the people through. Those are errors, are mistakes. People make mistakes. We're affording for that the maximal amount.
But if someone keeps making errors,
you remove them. There's incentive to remove them from the group that they continue to make errors in and continue to pass externalities around. If they're a problem, get rid of them. They're yours. I would push liability down the chain. We should be holding families more accountable for their people. You made those people.
You remove them or you forbear them. Somebody takes responsibility.
We're letting the commons take a beating because we're adjudicating disputes that should just, well, that's someone in your family's problem, not the commons problem.
I mean, that's actually an interesting statement, is that we used to hold families responsible for the behavior of their neighbors, their members. I'm not sure that isn't because they're the insurer of the polity against their offspring, right? One of the things I don't like about the education system, they're trying to take on that responsibility and by depriving families of it. First of all, the good families don't like it, and it doesn't work for the bad families, which is pretty awful. So we're doing it the wrong way. We're not sitting here going back and saying it was beautiful in the medieval, we're not Luddites or anything. It's just,
it was way worse, but it can be way, way better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just we can tool it so it's optimal, and you'll know when people are sticking out, meaning they're going, no, well, let's do it the way I want instead of the best way.
Okay, so let's falsify it again. We got two ways of falsifying it. One is you don't want to end up with Asian conformity. So I was thinking about the more I know about lying, right? The more it's sort of like making illogical stories, like jokes. The two guys walk into a bar, or three guys, you can talk about lying in that way, right? And so I can see that going. I don't think we can take lying any. In other words, the reason lying has been gotten has improved is really mass media, right? Without mass media, lying couldn't have. Right? The written word helped with lying, the printing press with lying, mass media helped with lying, mass communication, then mass media help with lying. Each of these things help with lying because lying is dependent upon to some degree, social construction. In other words, to eliminate falsification from the background, the environment. What I'm trying to get at is there, I'm making the same argument at scale that I was with the individual. So the individual is going to say, well, I want to lie and I can't get away with lying. So I just keep lying anyway, more outrageously. Right. I mean,
there are options, there are frames in which lying is acceptable, where it's mutually agreed upon. You know, like, look at actors; they lie for a living. I don't mean that in a negative way. They're literally claiming to be something they are not. Every line they read off a script is a lie, but it's a lie we accept and appreciate and value. Same thing is true of poker playing. The people engaged in poker expect each other to be lying. Lying's not a violation in that situation. So there are ways to accommodate for the people that want to lie or pursue lying or want to engage in deception.
You're saying basically war games.
Yeah.
War games are the means by which you preserve the capacity safely. Right? I mean, that's what because really war games are deception.
Yeah. All of these drives that we have positive outlets. We just have to discover them or create them or facilitate them.
So it's not that, oh, that's interesting. It's just that we're really trying to get it to the public, in public, about matters public.
Yes.
Right. But it's not about.
You can be as full of shit with your opinion as you want.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. Right. Okay. Okay. So that really, that sort of, so what you're saying is there will always be a vent, even if the equivalent of lying ends up being all these games we play. Yeah. Right. It's like hunting. Hunting is got turned into sports. Right. The same thing will happen with lying. Right.
There's a valuable, viable proxy for all of these things.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So
the problem is really the information that is being conveyed. When we look at actors, nobody believes that they're the people they're pretending to be.
Yes.
The problem is when they're portraying some false morals or
right.
You get heroism
of human nature and that stuff.
But it's back to that standard of testimonialism that we've defined, numerous times. So,
yep. Okay. I had another one. I think you might have answered both of them though. Okay. I did the individual scale. Now what about political scale? Now people are going to continue to lie at political scale. Well,
we want our spies to lie.
What?
We want our spies to lie.
Well, it's just I think that's the word I'm looking for is outwit versus deceive. To outwit is to use the asymmetry of information to gain an advantage. But to lie is to gain an advantage by disinformation.
Right. Yeah, you're not engaged in a reciprocal exchange with an enemy. So the measure of reciprocity doesn't apply.
So it's preservation of adversarial competition which will drive all behavior out of in-group verbal deceit and toward out-group wit, advantage, competition, warfare, whatever. Okay, right. So the whole thing is not to lose is to maintain adversarial competition while prohibition on lying to the public, in the public, to the public about matters public.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that doesn't seem to be a problem because fuck, we've been doing it forever, right? The whole trick is I've always been interested in group differences in humor. And I've always said that, at least in my family, the English side of the family, it has a lot of, it's like people don't understand poetry and all this other stuff, right? I'm like, well, it's because there's a wit in the words. I mean, it's too bad Russian is so difficult for us to understand because they use double, triple meanings on fucking everything, right? And English is about creating those just as much as French is, right? And these are little puzzles and games we play. And you're trying to fool someone or trick someone without a harm. What you're actually doing is training them to be, in other words, by training people unharmfully, you're training them to be defensive against harm, right? And so I said, there's in English culture, there's like, it's like there's 27 words for snow and Eskimo. It's not really true, but I mean, it's just the idea of the same. Well, there's like a fucking million ways in English to call someone a moron, right? And the Russian equivalent is the drunk guy. Like, it's not you're a moron because you're a moron. It's because you're a moron because you're drunk at the moment. Right. And so I always find that really a subtle difference in Russian and English humor is that it's basically underclass versus upper class. I mean, it's fucking the same shit. But anyway, I always found that very interesting is that the idiocy in the Russian humor is the drunk guy, right? Or the guy who's inebriated, which is basically everybody all the time. And the English humor is just you're a moron because you're not paying attention. So you're saying, Luke, that we can find, said again, we can find a positive,
A valuable, viable proxy.
for
Each of these expressions that we're considering negatives, right? The ones we're trying to outlaw.
yes,
Right? The lying, the deceptions, the frauds, and those things. They're outlawable when they are violations of reciprocity, but there are conditions in which they are not violations of reciprocity.
especially when it's ridiculous,
Right.
or it's not meaningful.
When it's
But,
just an opinion, you get to be as wrong about your opinions as you want to be. You just can't impose a cost on the public in asserting those opinions.
I'm just envisioning debates where the people actually understand lying the way we do,
Right.
and are actually they're actually trying to create really complex lies you can't detect, and how fucking hysterical that would be.
Be a game show.
A big, it would be. All right, so now we haven't thoroughly falsified it, but I've come to understand you're right. So that was, I don't know. I'd kind of prefer going back to punching in the face, because it worked really well. And because you can't get it once you get corrected. Like, I don't know, when you talk about getting punched in the face, it's like a surprise, right? It's like, holy shit. I don't remember the first time I got punched in the face, and it happened often enough that I don't remember it being a surprise. I just mean it being making me madder than it was before.
Yeah. And I want to see the norms be restored that allow for that, because it's such a low cost correction.
Yes, it is.
Compared to the corrections that we're using now. It's high efficiency and low cost.
Yeah, but you can't do that. Like the difference in status manners, ethics, and morals between Islam and Europe is just too far.
Right. Yeah. It has to be within the bounds of proportionality, and that doesn't exist when you have that heterogeneous behavior.
Right. I mean, their world is the mirror image.
Right.
Okay. Wow, that was really great. I have the screensaver of Chateau du Plessis in West France, where I have stayed for quite a bit of time in my life. It's just very this little castle. And it's run by the Benoit family. And they are part, what is that group of people between Spain and France called? The people, the mountain people, they're big. They wanted to know if they're Cro-Magnons. They're not. They're little people. Basques. They're a Basque family. Very fantastic. So I keep looking up there because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy while I'm talking to you guys. And I need the therapy while we're talking about this subject. Anyway, all right. So, okay. So I think we closed that issue.
We found the path anyways.
So, Brandon, I don't know if I can make you do this again, but you listed off the series.
Yeah.
On your fingers.
Sure.
Could you do that again?
Yeah, I was thinking in words, but you got to say them. Thinking in words and pictures, right? The words, pictures, systems, words, pictures, systems, simulations. And then there's competition between simulations.
That's beautiful.
We don't measure the end of that spectrum with IQ tests.
No, that's the fucking problem with IQ tests. Is they understate everything that's important. So what they do is they accurately test for how well you will do at clerical work. No, and that's okay. I'm sorry.
Wow.
And
true.
And you know, and I'm all for it, right? I mean, I get that. The problem is, what don't they test for? They're not testing for that last bit, which is the only thing that actually matters when you get out there. And they wonder, right? I keep saying to people, you know, we talk about IQ, and I'm a big fan of IQ because I suffer really badly when it's too many of the opposite. I was trying to make you laugh, but it didn't work. We have to suffer the mortals. But the truth is that for dim folk, it may be more important that they're conscientious than they're told, because that means they're going to be successful no matter where they are. And Martin always says he's not conscientious. I don't get that, but I mean,
Well, I'm also not successful, so there you go.
well, you would say you're unsuccessful. I don't see that.
Which just demonstrates that we have terrible measures for success right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, that's just weird to me. I think it's because we all, it's like, I like having been successful because it takes arguments against me off the table. That's it. That's all I care. That's the only value it had. Matter of fact, I'm way happier not running a business. And while I liked using business for social science experiments, I liked owning the rat maze that I was putting employees and partners through. A great deal, honestly. It doesn't mean I like the work. So when you say that, Martin, I think it's kind of funny, since you're fucking amazing at this shit, right? Utterly amazing. And yet you think you're not successful. And I'm like, well, by what criteria? So, I was talking to What I Fault Hist yesterday, Roger, was it yesterday? And it's creepy how similar we are, just creepy. Well, we're only, you know, I don't know how many, we're ethnically the same, right? I mean, from the same, we're ethnically and culturally the same. And so, so I mean, he says, well, you know, in the Jungian paradigm, we're magicians. And I'm going to bring Martin into this as well.
Ahoy.
Ahoy. Maria.
That was my sister.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your sister's name?
What?
What is your sister's name?
Marketa.
Marquetta. We don't get to, she doesn't want to say, I always want to get to know family members, because it's an opportunity to create mischief, really. But you know, but anyway, so
I just worry about saying anything on stuff that's going public.
oh, I see. I didn't see that. Sorry, I forgot we were recording. Anyway, tell her we said you're very smart, and she's lucky to have you as a brother. You're not
Sure.
gonna say you're not gonna say that, are you?
Probably not.
I'm gonna come visit you just so I can fuck with your family. You know.
Sister at least speaks English.
Oh, I see. Anyway, shit, I lost my train of thought and it was reasonably important. Oh, so you know, the problem is it's like the old thing is like is a composer or let's say a person who masters the violin, right? You know, that person doesn't make any money doing that. But do we benefit from having that person having done it? Well, of course we do. But it's not commercially beneficial. So is that person successful? Of course. Is a person is a person compensated for that success? Well, no, you know, no. There are plenty of scientists who aren't adequately compensated for their insights. And there are plenty of ordinary people who are hyper compensated for what they did. That's because it's the number of people who are willing to give us money for whatever we did, right? So I just like, what is success? You know, success is actually achieving what you set out to do, right? And if you're saying, I want to set out to what I do and be wealthy, well, I mean, most of the time, anybody will tell you the way you get wealth is not satisfying what makes you happy. It's satisfying something makes other people happy, despite the fact that it doesn't make you happy. Anyway, I'm trying to talk you up, Martin, because you know I love you.
Yeah, this is ultimately just cope.
Just like there exists patrons of the arts, we need some patrons of the thoughts.
Yes. Well, I got the feeling this is going to pay. I'm increasingly certain that if we don't screw this up, we do well by it. Anyway, all right. So have we exhausted this topic now? Do you have any other things for the week? Anything interesting happen this week? Did any politician do something stupid? Say anything profound? Did any
All the time.
They all did for sure.
Yeah.
None of them said anything profound.
Did anything else happen in the news or that make it? I haven't seen anything. All I've noticed is the slow, constant return of people that have paid attention to us before returning, and I just see that over and over again every day. Rip, 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 rip. So, in any event, all right. So if that's the case, I'm gonna stop the recording and sign off. Is that all right?
Just stop the recording. I'll ask about the book.
Okay. All right. So it's been Thursday, January 26th, 2023. We just finished a really fun little discourse at a staff meeting, and thank you all for watching.